Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren Smithson. I'm a Sapphire Ambassador with Plexus, and I am excited to talk through chapters 3 and 4 today of the new book we're doing, Captivate. I have been really liking this book because I thought that I was really good at interacting with people and had like good skills. But as I'm reading through some of her skills, I'm like, I have some stuff to brush up on. And just some things to not necessarily change everything, but to just some tweaks to make. And I think probably a lot of us can relate to that as we're reading through these chapters. So chapter 3 is called Spark and How to Have Dazzling Conversations. And in general, chapters 3 and 4, I kind of thought of as like trying to make ourselves more memorable and also trying to help ourselves remember other people well too, because the way that we're going to have really good interactions with people is if we leave those conversations and they remember us and we remember their name and something sparks in us that's like, I'm not going to forget that person because of this. Now we want to have that for those people, but we want to be memorable ourselves too. But dazzling conversations, she talks in the beginning about skipping small talk. And I know some people hate small talk, but as a physical therapist, like I feel like I have to have some small talk in the beginning of my sessions with people. Like when I have an evaluation come in, the beginning part is kind of like, how's your day so far? You know, kind of the small talk stuff, which leads to bigger talk, like the big talk that she talks about. But we don't always have time for the small talk first, and some people really don't like it. So she says to skip the small talk, and because that's the more mundane part of the conversation. The big talk is where all the sparks come in. That's when we're like releasing dopamine for each other because we're bringing up bigger topics and talking about more exciting things, and that's going to make people remember us too. And she says when you produce dopamine during a conversation, you give your conversation partner more enjoyment, and then they're also more likely to remember you because you're not just asking them about the weather, right? You're asking them about themselves or something that's a little more exciting. So like, for instance, she said she was waiting to be on a show or something, and somebody asked, do you like soup, rather than like, how's the weather? And that just like that whole conversation stuck in her mind a lot more. And the author, Elizabeth Gilbert, was there as well. And this person that was there making soup for their segment, they had just a much better conversation because it wasn't just 30 minutes of them sitting there saying like, where are you from? You know, why are you here? How long are you here for? It was a more interesting conversation because it was different. It wasn't just the normal small talk stuff. So she says novelty matters, asking fresh questions, because that's what's going to make us remember people. So she was talking about how they were watching our brains and blood flow to our brains during different kinds of conversations. And when we have new conversation topics come up, it activates our hippocampus, which is the learning and memory center. So that's why we're going to remember things better. Or like her example of, can you spare any change? Can you spare a quarter, or can you spare 37 cents? People were more likely to spare 37 cents because it was different. They weren't just like, do you have any change? Like, no, I'm going to ignore that. But do you have 37 cents? It's more specific. It's a little bit different. And people are like, I'm going to actually engage with that rather than just ignoring it. So just talking about different things, asking new questions, it makes our brains perk up. It makes us process conversations better. And again, people are going to remember you more if you bring up different stuff, and you're going to remember them more if you're having a conversation that both are bringing up sparks rather than just, where are you from? She says questions like, what do you do and how are you? We say these things more out of habits, and they're in our comfort zone, and it keeps us in the small talk. But she gave us some really good examples of things that she's asking people instead. So instead of like, what do you do for work, or what do you do? It's, are you working on any exciting projects lately? Or how's your day going so far? Or how are you? Instead of that, saying, what was the highlight of your day today? And that, number one, it makes it more of an open-ended question rather than like, How's your day? Good. What was the highlight of your day? Prompts them to say, that was a little bit different of a question. And then they're more likely to engage with that as well. And we talk about that a lot in Plexus, right? When we're following back up with people or even reaching out to people, not just asking yes or no questions, because that's going to get them to say yes or no. And then there's no more engagement there. But if we're really wanting to have a really long, good flowing conversation with somebody, if we ask something that's more open-ended, they're more likely to engage back with us and give us a little more to work with for our next follow-up question too. Okay, the next thing she talks about is using hot button topics for people. To me, I took this as not bringing up necessarily like controversial things or anything like that, because hot button topics, that's what I think of. But to me, what she was talking about is really paying attention to things that they're interested in and then asking them questions about that. So what I think of a lot is when you're talking to somebody that has kids, if you ask them about their kids, they're going to talk and talk and talk about their kids for a long time because that's something they like to talk about. Or if they are obsessed with their dog, like me, if you ask me about my dog, I'll probably talk to you for a long time about my dog because that's a hot button topic for me. So really pay attention to what people's interests are and ask about those things, because that's also going to ignite and spark a more like rich conversation with them too. Something I thought that was just funny is that she said she kind of changed what her job title was. So at first she would just say, I'm a writer. And then it was, I write about people. And then on her business cards, she wrote all three. So she did one that was, I'm a writer. One was, I write about people. And the other one was, I'm a professional people watcher. And she said that just changing that to make it a little bit different, she got a lot more response from just changing the wording there and just making it a little bit different. And then, gosh, I feel like I could just requote the whole thing, but the last thing I want to talk about in chapter 3, which was very helpful to me, is remembering people's names. She talked about a three-step name game to remember people's names. Now, for me, this is really challenging, and I probably shouldn't even say that out loud. I should say, no, I remember people's names, because if we say I'm bad at remembering people's names, that just keeps going in our heads. But it's something that I'm working on because it's important. People love to hear you say their name. It makes them feel more engaged with you. It makes them feel special. I know when somebody takes the time to remember my name, I feel really good about that too. So it's something I've been working on for a while. But her 3-step name game is when you meet somebody, repeat their name. So as soon as you hear it, repeat it back to them. Next, spell it out. So as you're talking to them and saying their name in your head, spell it out. Don't spell it out out loud to them, but spell it in your head. That'll help you remember it too. And then have sort of an anchor to remember it by. So if it sounds like, or if it's the same name as somebody that you know, you're going to say, I'm going to remember that name because it's the same name as my dad or the same name as my sister or whatever it is. Or if it sounds like an object or something that you have at your house, like, oh, I'll remember it because it sounds like that. So those 3 things can help you remember somebody's name. But I think probably the best way, and what I have noticed too, is if you say it back to them right away, then you're going to remember it too. So super helpful and super important to make people feel important, and they're going to remember you better if you are remembering their name too, because it's going to make them feel special. So that was chapter 3. And then chapter 4 is called Highlight and How to Be the Most Memorable Person in the Room. I loved this chapter because I was thinking of myself a lot with this, but also I have a couple people in my life that I'm like, you need to read this chapter. So how to be the most memorable person in the room. She ended up going on a vow of silence for a whole week because her friend was kind enough to tell her, you are an interrupter. And this is something I've noticed in myself and in my family, like my immediate family. We tend to like finish sentences for other people, and it drives me crazy. And so I've been trying really hard not to do that because I don't like being interrupted, and I don't think anybody does. So anyway, so she went on this vow of silence because she was like, I want to make sure that I'm fully listening to people and not just trying to like listen to respond. She said she was really uncomfortable with awkward pauses, so she really wouldn't allow any space. So she'd interrupt people and start talking so that there wasn't any awkward silence at all. So she wanted to be in the silence until the silence became less scary. She even went to a networking event while she was in her vow of silence. And it was so interesting to people and so different that she actually got some more interaction just by being in this vow of silence. She had 4 note cards, and he started talking to her, and she held up the, like, I'm in a vow of silence, sorry. And so then he started telling her about a time when he lost his voice and had laryngitis. And then he just kept talking, basically having the conversation at her. But then at the end, she realized he just wanted to be listened to, because he asked for her card at the end of their conversation. Even though she had said nothing to him, she was just listening to his stories. So truly, people just want to be heard. And I think if we relate this back to plexus, we know this, right? If we're talking to somebody about their health goals or trying to figure out how we can tweak up their regimen, if we're talking too much and not listening enough, they're not going to feel heard. They're not going to feel cared for. But if we just listen and take in all of what they have to say, we're going to be better able to give them recommendations. They're going to actually trust us more because we are listening more than we're talking. She says that humans actually spend 30 to 40% of our verbal output talking about ourselves. And then when it comes to social media, that actually goes all the way up to 80%. So as I've been posting this week, I've been thinking about that, because I'm like, man, I mean, I know I do that. Probably a lot of us could raise our hands because it's our comfort zone. I'm very comfortable telling people my story and talking about myself on social media. It's just my comfort zone. But if we've heard this a lot too, if we make something about solving somebody else's issue and talking about them, they're going to feel more heard. They're going to feel more trust with you. They're going to feel more valued, and like we're offering them a solution rather than if we're just talking about ourselves. So yeah, I think it's really important to learn to listen more than we talk, so that we can develop more of a bond with people that way. Last week on book club, I even mentioned this. I said we want to be more interested than we are interesting. And she says that in this chapter, which I thought was interesting. But that's how important that is. We want to be more interested in other people rather than interesting ourselves. People are going to connect with that a whole lot more. And that's why when we're asking other people questions, we're asking them about themselves, because once they do start talking about themselves, that's going to give them dopamine. So if we're only in a conversation, having a conversation talking about us, they're not going to necessarily feel like they had a great conversation. But if they leave that conversation feeling like they got to speak and they were heard, they're going to feel a lot more valued afterwards. She had a few different tips in this part of the book too, of like, number 1 was be a highlighter. So when you're listening to somebody, remember what they were saying and then highlight that back to them. Highlight their strengths back to them. And it's not just like sucking up and praising them, but really genuinely complimenting people will help bring out the best in them too. This made me think of, so she gave the example of different professions. There were maids that were told, like, you have a job where you burn a lot of calories. And so they actually followed them. And after they were told, you have a job where you burn a lot of calories, they burned more calories than they did before, probably because they were like, yeah, we do burn a lot of calories because we're working hard. So then they worked probably even harder than they did before. I had a friend one time, this was years ago. She asked me to speak at an athletic training conference. And my initial instinct for public speaking was always absolutely not. And so I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. And she was like, you are so good at blah, blah, blah. These are the reasons why you would be really good at this topic. And all of a sudden I felt empowered enough to be able to be the person speaking on that topic. So when we are genuinely complimenting people, they are going to show the best versions of themselves, basically. The next part, be a raver. This made me think of our three-way chats, but she says, when you're introducing somebody, don't just say like, hey, Elizabeth, this is Jackie. Hey, Jackie, this is Elizabeth. We want to say, this is this person, and this is why I love them, or this is something that I really noticed about them. You want to be raving about them for a few different reasons. When we're talking about our introductions and our three-way chats, what I do anyway is I say, this is Jackie. I think, Jackie, you can even say, you can tell people if I'm right with that. This is what I think I do. I usually say every single time, Jackie is one of the smartest people I know. She's a physical therapist. She stays at home with her kids now, but I always am saying she's one of the smartest people I know. And if anybody's going to be able to help you figure this out, it's going to be the two of us together figuring this out for you, because she's so freaking smart. So I rave about her, and that's important, not only because hopefully that makes Jackie feel good, and I genuinely mean it, but then the person that you're introducing them to is building trust with that person too. So in general, in your everyday life, be a raver, because it just makes people feel good. But in terms of Plexus, this makes me think of, again, our three-way chat. So rave about the person that you're introducing them to, their upline, that's going to help. But then also rave about the person that you're introducing to your upline, because that's going to make them feel really good too. And it doesn't have to be like, let's say you don't know them super well. It doesn't have to be the most deep things ever, but just even taking something that you do know about them and raving about it is going to make them feel special. And then the last one was, don't be a golem. So this is kind of the opposite of raving about people or being a highlighter. If we are giving bad labels to people, or even if we're just picking fun at them and making like little jokes about them not being a certain way, that is going to bring the worst out in people. They're not going to want to bring the best out in themselves, because they're going to feel defeated. So even if you're joking, even if you say like, they know that I'm kidding, it doesn't necessarily feel good to have a negatively charged joke towards somebody. So, because they'll still feel the sting anyway. So don't be negative toward people, even if it's a joke, because you're going to bring out the worst in them. You want to be bringing out the best in people with all of your interactions. I think that's everything that I want to say. There's a ton in those couple of chapters, but those were my highlights that I took away. So I will stop talking for now. I want to hear what you guys thought, and then we can kind of have a conversation about that from there.
I just liked how she related it to the brain. Like, I never would have put a first impression, like, I never would have thought of dopamine at all or linked any of what she linked together with a first impression. I go to the library once a week with Drew and meet new moms, probably at least once a week, like a new mom every single week. And I just met a brand new one on Tuesday, and that's all I could think about when I was reading chapter 3, like, what did she think of me? Because I forgot her name 3 times and had to ask her her name 3 times, even though it was Jamie. My name's Jade, that's, like, really similar, but I forget names constantly. Then Wednesday, I go to a Bible study. Again, brand new people I'm meeting. There's 2 ladies in the nursery, forgot their names. I called her I was like, "Chrissy?" She's like, "No, it's Cassie." I'm like, "Oh, no." So, that's all I could think about the whole time I was reading this chapter. I'm like, "I am also" okay, I don't wanna say terrible at names, because then I'm telling myself, but I need to work on the name game, 'cause it's not good. So, I really liked the chapter and talking about dopamine hits, like, I would be giving them a dopamine hit. I just thought that was cool.
I thought that was cool too. And I related it to when people remember my name. I'm like, oh, I'm surprised they remembered that. I never expect it. So I want you to just give yourself some grace. They probably didn't expect it either. It was their first time. I think it's something probably most of us can work on. But now you remember them, right?
Yeah.
So that's good.
Now I'm gonna be like putting him at a poker table with all the other Jamies that I know. Jamie Hass,
Right.
the new Jamie. When she said that, I was like, what does that mean? I'm like, at a poker table. And then I just kept reading, like, oh, literally, like in her brain, she pictures them all together. I'm like, that actually helps me remember their name.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
I love those strategies. And yes, names, some things I need to work on remembering sometimes. I don't know why, but I'm very forgetful with them. But I used to be horribly shy as a child and growing up, like painfully shy, like would hate to even look at people. So strategies that I have learned and which has been reiterated into the book is I hate talking about myself. So I love just asking them questions, getting them talking, and that takes the pressure off of me. So selfishly, I do that. But then you learn so much from people. Like I've learned crazy things from my patients. You get them talking about their hobbies and, oh, tell me more about that. Like, what does that entail? And then pretty soon they're like, telling you how they paint pictures with beeswax and like all this other stuff. And I'm like, I never even knew that was possible. So it's so fascinating, when you get people talking, it takes the pressure off of you and it highlights them. And then they feel great that you've taken such an interest in them. And therefore you become memorable to them because you cared about them enough to ask about their interests and, dove into like deeper questions about what they're saying. So that's kind of a strategy as a secret introvert, I think, that I've kind of developed. And then talking about being a raver, I think as a parent, this is something that we need to do. And even with like nicknames, I always hated when people would label, well, this is my, smart kid, this is my athletic kid, this is my whatever. Like you're placing them in a box and, how does that make the kids feel? Like if I'm the smart one, you mean I'm not athletic? Like, or the athletic one, you mean I'm not smart? I think sometimes I was very careful not to do this with my kids, but because I always hated it when I saw other people do this, but not labeling them, not putting a label on them and putting them into a box, but like you can pour into them and call out, their amazing qualities. And something I would do when I tucked my kids in every night after we read our stories and such was I would tell them like how kind they were and how sweet they were and how smart they were. And, just, that they were, going to be somebody very special someday when they would grow up and they could, use these qualities to change people's lives. And I just would always pour into them, even as like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, kind of all the way through elementary school when they stopped wanting me to tuck them in, but when they became teenagers. But just raving to them and help pour into them. I think that's important to do. And then when you're introducing them to people or family members, not putting that label on them.
That's such a good point, Rochelle. And Jade put this in the thing in the chat, but something that's meant to be positive, like this is my smart kid, could definitely have a negative impact. So I think that's a really good point. I wanted to go back to what you're saying about asking people questions, because as a PT, I also do that. But what I notice that I do is I'll ask them a question and they start talking about themselves. And then in my trying to relate with them, I'll like try to come up with a way that I have experienced something like that before. And sometimes that drives people crazy. And she's talking about that in this chapter too. Like we don't always have to have a story that relates to it. So something that I've been trying to do is just notice myself doing that. And instead of having to have a story every time, which I don't, but instead of doing that, I just ask them another question and ask them another question, just like you were saying. be more interested in what they have to say and not trying to come up with how you have something to relate to that. So, yeah. My brother-in-law, my sister's fiance, has a story for every single conversation piece, and it drives me and my husband absolutely crazy. So I'm going to have him read this chapter, I think.
That's funny. One of the things I thought about when they were talking about asking the questions too, even like in our coaching calls, like in the Joel coaching, even they'll ask questions, and they're not giving you answers. They're keeping asking you more and more questions so that you can think more and tell them more, and you come up with some of the answers on your own. So we do that a lot too, or we should be doing that a lot more too, when we're talking to our people as well. So I thought it was interesting too.
That's a really good point, Jackie. Because we're listening and not always listening, not trying to listen to respond, but listening because we truly care and want to know. And then they just continue to expand on that. And we ask another question. And like you said, they do end up answering their own questions a lot. And we end up, when I'm being coached, I end up answering my own questions a lot too, for that same reason. Anybody else have anything they want to share from these couple chapters?
So I wrote down those 7 topic ideas for conversation starters. I thought they were excellent. And she was right on with the last 2, the ones that fell lower in the list of the people rated, what do you do? What brings you here? She's right. We fall into that because it's comfortable and it's easy. And sometimes you might get caught off guard. That happens. And for me, sometimes, I might not be in a very conversational mood. And so you just kind of go with whatever's natural. But practicing those can definitely help so that they're fresher in your memory and more natural when you ask those questions. And then going back to the positive labels and celebrating their unique features and things that they're excited about. I thought that was a great idea. Be a raver, be a highlighter. We'll definitely be practicing that. Today I had the opportunity to be better at making introductions, as I had a new employee start, and we work in the Crystal Falls office, and we happen to be over in the Escanaba office for some work related over in this area. And I was just taking the opportunity, going around the office, making introductions. And unfortunately, I failed to be better at introductions. I got into my normal habit of, Tim, meet Joe. Joe, this is Tim. Tim's the new guy. And let the conversation go from there. And I did witness at times some people are very natural. Oh, hey, where are you from? What did you do before you came to MDOT? How many kids do you have? Where do you live? Other people like, hey, nice to meet you. Okay, moving on. So yeah, got to witness that a little bit.
I always love your real life examples. It seems like every week you've got something that happened that relates to the book we're reading, and it's really interesting to hear a real life example. So thank you.
Something too I want to mention with convention coming up, we're going to be meeting and interacting and mingling with a lot of people outside of our group, which is totally awesome. But some things that I did that Jackie had me prepare last year, and Jade and Jen and I, was watching some Diamond docs and then starting to practice and prepare for questions to ask some of the diamonds that we want to talk to. So that way, when we are introduced to them, we're not like kind of dumbfounded or starstruck, or, we have these, very deep, interesting questions to learn from them. So in everyday life, we can always, have like a list of questions, like go-to questions that we have when we meet people, to get conversations started too. And with convention, if you guys are going, which I hope everybody is, definitely start preparing your list of questions to ask people and watching those diamond decks, so you get to know and recognize them in the crowds.
Such a good tip.
I really like that point, Rochelle. I'm also in the therapy world, and I have always worked for the past 6 years of my career with adults. And so it's very easy for me to have conversations with adults and ask questions about, how Steve said, how are you? How is your day? But I work with kids now. And of course, I have kids of my own, but it's so much different when you are trying to engage with a child. And just to like tie it all together, when I start speaking to a child, I don't say, hi, how are you today? I say, hi, I came to play today. And so it's like, then they're like, oh, play. And so it's like something automatically engaging, which I know almost everybody on here is a parent, but like I'm thinking about it in terms of like, okay, well, I don't just say, hey, how are you today to a child. So it was such a like that point to me, like, hey, how are like the conversation starters? I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so true. You say something fun and engaging to a child. Not that you want to talk to an adult like a child, but just thinking of different ways to engage them. And then also with the parents is highlighting on things that they're saying. This book is really helping me in my new career path, like my new pediatric world. And especially with some of the parents. And specifically today, I had a mom was talking to me about things that are very hard for her to do. And I highlighted on something that she had told me at the very first time that I met her. And I could just see in her eyes that she was like, oh my gosh, yes, I did do that. And you remember that. And so I need to, in my non-work life, in my plexus life, and even with my friends and family, and just being invested in what they're saying, and not just speak to listen, but speak to hear and understand, and really take in what they're saying. So I really like these two chapters. They were super helpful to me.
I guess I'll add something. Sorry for the blue light, you guys. I have like Allie's sleeping, whatever. So I guess what I struggle with sometimes is like when I'm talking to somebody new, I want to find out something about them that will help me remember them, because instead of being so robotic and just going from messenger chat to messenger chat, I need to like learn something about this person to help me remember them. So um once we get into like asking or figuring out what products would be best for them, I've been trying to get into a habit of like asking, instead of like, what do you do for a living, or what do you do, just kind of those awkward questions. Sometimes I have a hard time just asking those straight out, but I always say, what does your daily routine look like? Or what does your day consist of? Or how can we help you find a routine that works for your lifestyle? And then that's kind of a good open question that I can learn more about their day. And then usually they tell me what they do for a living, if they have kids, whether they're crazy busy or if they just say they go to work and come home, or, so that's kind of a thing that I've been doing lately that I've found to be really helpful in learning more about people without just asking them, what do you do for a living? I just say, I ask what
what's a normal day in your life look like, and how can we make this routine with these products, you know, kind of fit your lifestyle. So anyway, these chapters were great. I'm like learning so much and taking so much away from all of you guys right now, and I'm gonna listen more and talk less, and also, you know, not listen to talk back to them or like come up with your own story to relate to them, because like Lauren said, sometimes that drives people nuts, and I think I do that sometimes, so I'm gonna be more mindful.
I think that's a great idea of ways to like ask people what they do. What was I going to say about that? Because then they are feeling more like you are engaging with them and it's not just like a general question. So they probably feel more valued too, Angie. And I think that just naturally you're really good at connecting with people. So that's probably why that comes so naturally to you. But I think that was good of you to share that as a tip for everybody, because we don't all ask questions the same way, but maybe we could learn more about people just by tweaking little things like that. Anybody else have any nuggets that they want to share? Well, thank you all for hopping on. I appreciate it so much. And I feel like you all had really good examples and things to share today. So thank you for engaging with that too. And we will see you next week. Bye, everybody.